It started as the perfect escape, a weekend in the wilderness to leave behind the monotony of city life. 5 of us, my closest friends, jammed ourselves into 2 cars, excited and carefree. The aroma of pine and fresh earth filled the air as the city skyline vanished in our rearview mirrors. This forest sanctuary was far removed from the buzzing of cell phones, far from well-trodden trails, far from civilization itself. Just the adventure we craved, or so we thought. The first night passed in bliss. Our tents formed a cozy half-circle near a gentle creek, the quiet murmurs of water becoming our backdrop. Under an infinity of stars, marshmallows melted into flames as ghost stories passed between us in the flickering firelight. Laughter echoed through the woods, filling the void of quiet. It was the kind of peace that almost feels too perfect, like the forewarning calm in a storm. Yet by the second night it became clear we had mistaken serenity for safety. It started with a whistle, a faint melodic note as though carried on the wind itself. We sat huddled around the fire, our faces glowing orange, engaged in playful scare tactics. None of us admitted to hearing it at first. For a moment, it was easy to dismiss. But I heard it. "Nice try," I said, my tone exaggerated as I glanced around the circle. Not creepy at all. My friend's baffled stares froze me mid-smirk. "What are you talking about?" Sarah asked, frowning. Her voice faltered, almost embarrassed. "The whistling," I replied, harsher now. "What else would I mean?" I assumed they were messing with me, but their raised eyebrows and exchanged glances cut deep into that confidence. No one else claimed to have heard a thing. Shrugging it off, I told myself it was nature, a wandering breeze, perhaps. Forests harbor strange noises after dark, don't they? We tried to dismiss it. We really did. But as the night grew older, alcohol and laughter faded into something unnatural and sobering. The whistling came back, this time louder, nearer, rhythmic, calculated. It moved in a pattern starting with a low, mournful rise and punctuated by 2 sharp bursts. Whoever, or whatever was out there wasn't aimless. It was following intentions only it understood. "Okay, enough games," David barked, masking fear with irritation. His flashlight lit the swinging trees like ghosts as he spun toward the wall of darkness. No answer came from the tree line, just more whistling. It shifted, circled us. It wasn't confined to one place, making it impossible to follow. It was as if the very forest was alive, winding around us like a predator stalking its prey. The sound reverberated through the pines, the sinister vibrations unnerving us all. "Maybe it's a bird," Sarah suggested weakly, though her voice betrayed the innocence of her words. "Some creature. Harmless, right?" Chris let out a sharp laugh. "Sure, a bird composing creepy symphonies just to spook a bunch of idiots in the woods, of course." No one could settle after that exchange, yet none of us wanted to admit how terrified we were. We doused the fire and retreated into the thin fabric of our tents, telling ourselves sleep would make it all go away. But it didn't stop. As I lay curled in my sleeping bag, the piercing whistle rose louder, mocking my comfort. This was no nocturnal creature calling to a mate. It was focused, deliberate, intelligent, and then it grew personal. The nature of the sound shifted. At first it was subtle, and I willed myself to believe it was paranoia lodging tricks into my ears. But when I heard it mimicking me, my voice, my very cadence, denial melted in the icy grip of fear. "Over here," the voice teased, echoing the phrase I'd tossed earlier in the evening. It was the same tone, pitch, and rhythm as my own voice. Shaking, I unzipped the tent just enough to peer out. Moonlight pooled at the base of the towering pines, casting shadows that seemed to sway sorcerously in the wind. The clearing appeared empty, but the sound persisted, circling and pressing in closer and closer like invisible hands closing a noose. The sound stopped suddenly, replaced by something infinitely worse. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, and slow, they crunched through brittle leaves just beyond my vision. I froze. My breath hitched in my throat, and all I could do was listen helplessly as they stopped mere inches from my tent. Then, impossibly, the whistling returned. It was softer now, familiar, a sinister lullaby wrapping me in dread. My chest tightened as I stared at the zipper, expecting any second for it to slide open on its own. I'd had enough. Everything in me exploded at once, and I screamed, wrenching the tent open and shining my flashlight wildly into the clearing. The light revealed nothing but emptiness and flickering shadows. My friends stumbled out of their tents in a panic. "What's going on?" Sarah shouted, clutching the axe we'd used to chop firewood. Her fear mirrored mine. None of us were in disbelief any longer. The forest wasn't playing games. It was preying on us. I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could summon the words, the whistling came again. Louder, bolder, all-encompassing. It wasn't one sound anymore. It was everything. It was us. Our voices echoed from the trees, laughing and whispering in grotesque chorus. Our own screams, though we hadn't screamed not yet, were flung back at us with horrifying distortion. This was no prank. This was no creature native to any earth we recognized. It was something far worse, something unknowable. None of us waited for an explanation. We grabbed only what was closest to us and sprinted into the trees without second-guessing. The flashlight in David's trembling hand flickered as we tore blindly through the undergrowth. Thorns clawed at our skin, branches cut like blades. Behind us, the whistling persisted, fading only slightly as we ran, refusing to let us go. Its pattern spiraled chaotically like a symphony, punctuated by warped fragments of our own voices. It wasn't just chasing us, it was toying with us. When the forest finally thinned and the cars came into view, a collective gasp of relief rippled through the group. We piled into the vehicles, trembling and drenched in fear, and floored the accelerators. No one needed to suggest going back to the city. We fled in silence, our minds too racked by the unknown to process words. As the forest line melted into distant shadows in the rearview mirror, I felt the first tinge of relief. Yet deep down, some part of me knew this wasn't over. The whistling didn't belong to the forest. It had followed us there. What was to stop it from following us back out? We never returned to the woods. We didn't dare. The moment was sealed, a pact of terror written on our trembling bones. None of us spoke about it afterward, at least not with any depth. What could we say that wouldn't sound insane? But late at night, as I lie in bed, a chill slithers up my spine. Sometimes when the world has quieted to nothing, I hear it again. Faint, distant, whistling just outside my window. We had been hiking for hours, the relentless trail testing our endurance. Our legs burned with every step and our canteens were dangerously low. Suddenly, we stumbled upon something we'd never expected, a lake. It was perfectly round, so still it resembled a polished mirror. The water was impossibly clear, displaying every pebble that lined its bottom, yet lifeless. No fish swam, not even an insect buzzed above its surface. The air itself seemed stolen. No birds, no wind. Just an oppressive silence that curled around us like unseen fingers. "This is perfect," Jake exclaimed, his voice breaking the spell. He tossed his pack to the ground with a grin, oblivious to the tension that seemed to rest heavier with each passing second. "Come on, this is what we came for." The rest of us, Sarah, Chris, and me, exchanged hesitant glances but said nothing. Fatigue overruled our unease, and the tantalizing promise of rest was too alluring. Reluctantly, we agreed and pitched our tents near the lake, doing our best to ignore the weight of the silence pressing in from all directions. As the sun disappeared behind the surrounding trees, the lake transformed. The shimmering surface turned a deep, inky black, as if it consumed the fading light. We built a fire, the crackling flame offering a fragile bubble of normalcy amidst the encroaching darkness. We tried to shake off the unease, sharing jokes and stories, but nothing felt right. Laughter fell flat, and every whispered word seemed swallowed by the oppressive silence beyond the firelight. "I'm going for a swim," Jake declared out of nowhere, standing up and peeling off his shirt. "Are you insane?" Sarah was the first to speak, her voice sharp and raw. "It's freezing. Do you even know how deep it is?" Jake waved her off with that cocky grin of his. "Relax, the water's fine. Come on, live a little." We barely had a moment to protest before he sprinted towards the edge of the lake. His body hit the water with a deafening splash, shattering the stillness. For a fleeting moment, it was as if everything was normal. Jake surfaced, shaking the water from his dark hair, laughing. His words cut off abruptly like someone had stolen the breath from his lungs. Jake's grin twisted into wide-eyed panic. He jerked violently, his hands clawing at the water. His voice broke into a desperate scream. "Help me!" We ran to the water's edge, our hearts pounding. Jake thrashed wildly, his arms flinging water as he gasped in terror. "Something's got me," he cried out. The words barely escaped his lips before he was yanked under, his flailing arms vanishing beneath the still surface. For a frozen second, there was nothing. No ripples, no bubbles, just the eerie calm of the mirrored lake, as if Jake had never been there at all. "Jake!" I shouted, my voice raw as dread twisted in my chest. The silence that responded was more crushing than any sound could have been. "We have to go in after him," Sarah said, trembling. Chris took a step back. "No way, did you see that? There's something in there. I'm not going in." Fear paralyzed us. Each second stretched longer than the last as we stood on the shore, caught in a battle between terror and guilt. Deep down, we all knew Jake wasn't coming back. Not from that. We eventually agreed to wait for dawn, clinging to a fragile hope that Jake had somehow swum to the opposite shore or found a way out. But sleep didn't come. We huddled together by the fire, the lake staring back at us, black and lifeless, as if mocking our helplessness. The hours crawled, each moment weighed down by the oppressive silence. When the first light of dawn finally broke, the scene was haunting in its serenity. The water shimmered golden beneath the rising sun, its stillness untouched. There was no sign of Jake, no ripples, no clothes, no trace he'd ever existed. We packed our gear quickly, an unspoken understanding driving our frantic movements. We needed to leave this place. The silence wouldn't let us breathe. That was when Sarah saw them, footprints. They trailed from the water's edge, muddy and erratic, disappearing into the forest. For a moment, hope flared. "Jake?" Sarah's whisper was thin, desperate. But as we examined the prints, an unsettling realization settled over us. They were wrong, too deep, too spread out. It looked like whoever or whatever had made them was dragging something heavy. "They weren't there before," Sarah murmured, her face pale as the morning light. After a tortured pause, we made our choice. None of us dared to follow the trail. We turned our backs on the lake and left that cursed place. We never spoke about that night again, pretending as though silence could erase the horror etched into our memories. But the lake stayed with me. It lurks in my dreams, vivid and suffocating. In those dreams, the water isn't still. It churns violently, rippling as if something beneath its surface is reaching out, a reminder of what we left behind. Sometimes, as I lie awake in the dead of night, I swear I can hear Jake's voice. Faint but unmistakable, it carries through the quiet darkness, echoing the final words I'll never forget. "Help me." The memories, the silence, the lake, they've carved themselves into the fabric of my being. Wherever Jake is, whatever's become of him, I can't shake the feeling that it's waiting. The lake is waiting. But for what? Or for whom? It was supposed to be a bonding trip, a weekend away from screens, homework, and the constant hum of modern life. Mom, Dad, my sister Lily, and I had packed up the old family tent and headed into the woods, thinking a few days in nature would bring us closer together. We found a picturesque clearing surrounded by towering pines, their branches stretching skyward like guardians of the forest. As evening approached, we set up camp, unrolling sleeping bags and cracking jokes while assembling the tent. By the time the sun melted into the horizon, we had built a proud bonfire in the center of the clearing. The golden flames flickered and roared, fighting back the encroaching darkness. It felt cozy, safe, a bubble of warmth in the cold, silent woods. The fire was warm, its crackling comforting as the night grew still around us. We sat in a circle, sharing stories and laughing. The flickering firelight cast long shadows that danced on the forest floor, wrapping us in a world of light and dark. But comfort is fleeting, and safety, I've learned, is often an illusion. It started softly, barely there at first, a creeping sensation, the prickling awareness of being watched. At first I brushed it off, chalking it up to the chilling beauty of the night. But then I noticed it. An extra shadow. I counted again, slower this time. One for Mom, one for Dad, one for Lily, and one for me. But on the ground around the fire, under the halo of light, 5 shadows stretched long and flickering. The 5th shadow was taller, thinner, and eerily still. It moved only when the flames danced, as if tied to the fire itself. Lily's mysterious disappearance as they grapple with fear and the unknown in the depths of the forest. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice quivered. "Do you guys see that?" "See what?" Dad asked, prodding the fire with a stick, unrelated embers floating upward into the dark. "That shadow, there's an extra one." My voice cracked just enough to make Lily fidget nervously in her seat. She followed my outstretched finger, her brows furrowing. "Stop trying to freak me out," she snapped, scooting closer to Mom as if proximity would erase what we both saw. Lily's expression told me the truth. She'd noticed it too. "Probably just the way the light is hitting the trees," Mom interjected, though her gaze lingered on the ground longer than I was comfortable with. Her lips pressed into a stiff line. The 4 of us fell into an uneasy silence. Gone was the carefree glow of a peaceful family night. The air grew heavy, pressing on us like an unspoken threat, and the forest seemed to huddle closer, the gaps between trees filling with shadows and whispers. Every time the flames burned low, sputtering under the weight of burning logs, the extra shadow grew stronger. Its edges sharpened, its presence bolder. And it wasn't staying still. "Let's throw some more wood on the fire," Dad said briskly, his voice lacking its usual warmth. He grabbed a thick log and tossed it in, sending hungry sparks spiraling skyward. The fire roared, and for a fleeting moment, the shadow vanished into the light. Relief washed over me, thick and clumsy. "Must have been the light after all," I muttered, my words aimed more to myself than anyone. But hope is brittle, especially when fear has already sprouted roots. As the minutes ticked by, the fire began to wane again, shrinking inward despite our efforts to feed it. The air, clammy and still, felt almost alive, as if the forest were holding its breath. And the shadow returned, moving now, inching closer to us. We didn't speak of it, but everyone knew. Dad's hand gripped the stick he'd been using to stoke the flames, a makeshift weapon for an invisible enemy. Mom sat stiffly, glancing over her shoulder more often than before. Lily's small frame pressed into my side, her face pale and pinched. "It's coming closer," Lily whispered. Her words felt brittle, fragile. By the time the fire dwindled to glowing embers, the shadow had crept far past the boundaries of fear. It loomed behind Lily now, tall and solid against the faint light. "Get in the tent," Dad hissed, his voice shaking but commanding. We didn't hesitate. Scrambling over each other, we zipped the tent closed in record time. Dad knelt by the entrance, flashlight held like a weapon, its beam slicing through the fabric as though it might keep whatever was outside at bay. Inside, the air was suffocating, full of unspoken truths no one dared voice. The faint crackle of dying embers and the rustle of unseen forest movement became a symphony of terror. None of us slept, not even Lily, who clutched my arm so tightly it hurt. When the feeble light of dawn crept across the clearing, turning shadows to whispers, we finally dared to peek outside. The campfire was nothing more than a cold pile of ash and blackened wood. The shadow that had haunted us was gone, but so was Lily. Her sleeping bag still lay neatly inside the tent, zipped and waiting for her return. Her shoes sat exactly where she had left them by the fire. Everything remained, except Lily. We called her name until our voices cracked, searching through the endless maze of trees. The forest only answered with silence, its depths impenetrable and unyielding. Hours passed in futile desperation until we stumbled back into the clearing. That's when we saw it. On the ground, right where Lily had last sat, was an unmistakable faint silhouette. A shadow burned into the forest floor, darker than the earth and ash around it. It lingered like a scar, a cruel reminder of the night. We left the forest that day. We never went back. Years have passed, but the events of that night haunt me still. Sometimes when I sit by a campfire, whether with friends or alone, I feel it. The oppressive weight of an unseen presence hanging just beyond the edge of the light. But deep inside, I know better. I know what we all saw that night. I know what the flames tried to guard us from but failed to stop. And sometimes, in the fragile silence between crackling logs or distant howls, I swear I see it again. That faint, familiar shadow creeping just a little closer. So beware, fellow travelers, lovers of the night and crackling fires. Be careful where you set your camp in the woods. Watch the dancing light and its secrets. And always count the shadows around you, because if you count one too many, you might not leave the forest whole.